I wanted to tell a story from my past. It's about my dad. It's a good one. Um, this is 20 plus years ago, and I wanted to change the light bulbs in our family business from incandescent to fluorescent. We were paying a ridiculous amount of money for electricity. Our electric bills were like $1,600 to $1,800. Um, especially with air conditioning in the summertime. But there's a problem. My dad was very intelligent. He's definitely not a dummy. I would definitely consider him above average. He's not intelligent about all things, and something like this is a little outside his wheelhouse. But he's also a businessman, and again, he's not dumb. However, he does have, what do you call it? Stubbornness. When he gets an idea in his head, it's very hard to get that idea out of his head, and I knew this was going to be one of those things because he shot me down a few times. So I finally forced the issue one night. I'm paraphrasing a lot of this. I don't remember all the exact words I used back then. But I basically said, hey, you want me to help you run this place? Needs more light. Do you want me to actually help you run this place, or is that just a name? He stopped what he was doing, and he looked at me. He was like, okay, what is it? I was like, we need to talk about electricity. He said, the damn bulbs again. I was like, yes, the damn bulbs again. We're spending a lot of money on them. And he's like, Chris, I don't want to change the bulbs out. They're $7 a piece. I was like, you said you'd listen. He's like, okay, you tricked me. I'll listen. So I said, I can't tell you how this works. I was like, you know as well as I do that's not going to work. Doesn't matter whether what I'm saying is true or not. You're not going to accept it. I said, this is something that's called cognitive dissonance. He looked at me and he's like, are you calling me a name? I was like, do you think I would call you a name? He said, no, you wouldn't do that. I was like, good. I was like, it is a big word. Cognitive dissonance is when you have an idea in your head and then you are presented with a differing idea. And these two ideas both say they're true and they conflict. It's cognitive, it's in your head, and it creates dissonance because you're having trouble deciding which one. And we tend to be biased on the idea that we already have. This is why we try to brainwash children. Because if we can instill them with the idea that we want as children, then it becomes much more difficult to correct that later in life. It was other issues we were discussing at the time. I was like, that's why we do that, because we don't want them to change those ideas. We want to control how they think. That's why education is so important. And he agreed. I said, so I need to teach you about electricity, how it works, and how you pay for it. I was like, this is going to be very simplified, but, he's like, I understand. You're not insulting me. Just go ahead. I handed him the electric bill. I said, do you know how much power we used last month? He looked on the electric bill, and like I said, he's not a dummy. He eventually figured it out, and he found the area total kilowatts. I was like, total kilowatts. I was like, that's right. And I was like, now do you know how much money that cost us? He said, 14, 15 cents a kilowatt hour. I was like, nope, that's not what you paid. And I was like, what did you always tell me about how much something costs? And I saw the light go off. And he's like, what do they actually charge us? What comes out of the bank account? I was like, that's right. And I was like, your bill is split up into a whole bunch of different charges. Generation charges, transmission charges, fees, taxes, all kinds of crap is built into that bill. You can see it's all over there. He was like, yeah, it's pretty complicated. I was like, not really. It's very simple. You have the total dollars and you have the total kilowatts. And of course, he's smart. He figured it out. He's like, I just divide the kilowatts into the dollars. I was like, exactly. And so he took the total of the bill, it was like $1,400 and some odd dollars, and divided it by the total kilowatts used. He's like, wow, that's a lot. I was like, yeah, it is, isn't it? And so I was like, now, do you understand the difference between a kilowatt and a watt? And he looked at me like, not really. It's like different units. It's like feet and inches. Except in this case, it's kilowatts and watts. And I was like, you know how metric works? Like, yeah, you just move the decimal. I was like, good. Now, how many watts is in a kilowatt? I saw him deciding. I knew what he was thinking. He was trying to decide if it was 100 or 1,000. He guessed right. He said 1,000. I was like, good guess. And he laughed because he knew I caught him guessing. And I was like, that's right. A kilowatt is 1,000 watts. I was like, do you know why we're using watts and not kilowatts? And he said, no. And I was like, because every gadget in this store is measured in watts, not kilowatts. He's like, okay. I was like, now, do you understand the difference between power and energy? He looked at me. He's like, you're the one who's going to be an engineer. I was hoping to be an aerospace engineer at the time. I was like, yes, but you have to understand this. I was like, so here's what I want you to do. I was like, I want you to make a fist. And I was like, without hurting yourself, I want you to punch the table. He's like, what? I was like, punch the table. And so he's like, and he punches the table. And I was like, okay, you just transferred energy and power to the table. He's like, they're the same thing. I was like, want to bet? He's like, okay, explain the difference. I was like, now, place your fist against the table. And he did. And I was like, now push on the table until you think you've exerted the same amount of total energy as when you punched the table. He held his fist there for like 5 seconds and said, enough? And I was like, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But the point is, you now understand that there's a difference between power and energy. Let's assume you got it right and you pressed your fist against the table and delivered the same amount of energy as the first punch. He's like, I didn't punch it this time. I was like, well, you kind of did. A punch is pushing really hard. He's like, okay, I get it. And I was like, so the difference is power and energy is how much energy you transfer from your fist to that table. So how much energy? Power is the rate at which you deliver that energy. So this is about the same as 1, 2, 3, about the same as that. I don't know if it is, but just go with it, okay? So the difference is time, okay? So power is how much power you need. You know, how much energy you need. Energy is power over time. I was like, you are not charged for power. You are charged for energy. That's why they charge you not in kilowatts, but in kilowatt hours. So if your device consumes 1 kilowatt for 1 hour, that is 1 kilowatt hour. If your device consumes 500 watts, which is half a kilowatt for 1 hour, you've consumed 1/2 kilowatt hour. If you run that device for 2 hours, and he said, I pointed to him, it's like, okay, now it's consumed a kilowatt hour. And we paid that much for that. Like, okay. I was like, now, how much power does that bulb above your head consume? He looked up, immediately looked down because it's very bright. And I was like, boxes on the shelf. He's like, asshole. He grabs the box and says, okay, 100 watts. And I was like, now, a bulb, we measure in lumens, not watts. How much light do we get is lumens. How much power do we consume to get that light is watts. Okay, I was like, this bulb, the compact fluorescent, produces the same lumens as that bulb, but it consumes a different amount of power. Now, because we have always used incandescent bulbs, the relationship between lumens and watts doesn't really change. It's not enough for us to matter. That's why we don't say, I need a 1100 lumen bulb. We say, I need a 100 watt bulb. He's like, okay, that makes sense. Now, this is a different technology, so it uses a different number of watts to get the same amount of lumens. The reason it says 75 watt equivalent is because it puts out the same number of lumens as a 75-watt soft incandescent bulb. He understood that. I was like, now, that number you wrote down on how much we pay per kilowatt hour, we need to put that into watts. So divide it by 1,000. And he did. He came up with a very tiny number. Like, say, it doesn't take very much. I was like, how long is that bulb on? He looked up. He almost looked up again. Looked down. Like, we never turn it off. It's on 24/7. I was like, that's right. And how much is every other bulb in this building on for? At least 18 hours a day. I was like, good. So remember, energy, which is what you're paying for, is power over time. That's watt hours or watts over time in hours. It's like, so take the dollar amount that we pay per watt and multiply that by 100. He did, came up with a very small number. I was like, that's how much pennies that bulb costs to run for 1 hour. I was like, now, what are you going to do next? I was like, well, how many hours in a month? I was like, well, it's easier. How many hours in a day? And he multiplied by 24. I was like, now, how many days in a month? He's like, I got you. And he multiplied by 30. Okay. And he looked at the number on the screen of the calculator, looked at the pack of bulbs, looked at the number, and I saw him reset the calculator and type the numbers again. And I was like, that's in pennies. That's in cents. He's like, I know how to do money. And he did it again. And I saw him do it a third time. He picked up the bill. He's like, this can't be right. And I was like, well, did you make a mistake somewhere? I was like, look at the bill again. Make sure you use the right number of kilowatts that we use and the right number of dollars that we got charged. I was like, are there any fees in there? Like maybe late fee or maybe it's 2 bills? He was like, nope, it's all zero just this last month. And he looked at me. He's like, this can't be right. And I was like, Dad, our electric bill's $1,600. Where do you think that's going? He's like, well, the air conditioner. I was like, that's the difference between summer and winter. And he looked at me. He's like, our electric bill's $1,200 in the winter. I was like, so it costs you about $400 a month for an air conditioner. And he realized, I was like, where do you think the rest of the power's going? He's like, you're telling me that one bulb costs us $18 a month in electricity? And I said, yes. And I looked at him and I said, we have 100 of them. Not quite 100 of them, but we had a lot of bulbs. And he just was dumbfounded, just looking at me like, he sat there for a solid 2.5, 3 minutes as the cognitive dissonance was settled, because again, there wasn't no religious issues with this. This was just, he'd never considered it before. He never thought about it. I was like, now remember, at home, this is very different. We don't run bulbs 18 hours a day at home. I was like, but here we do. I said, even the occupancy bulbs in your booths consume 32 watts each. And you have 32 of them. I was like, that's a kilowatt hour just for those bulbs in the red and blue covers. He just looked at me. I was like, where's it all going? I was like, Dad, it melts the enclosures. Because some of them, when the bulb moves a little too much, it'll actually melt part of the plastic if it gets too close to it. It's in like an oval shaped enclosure and the bulb sits here, but sometimes somebody will bend it and the bulb will get down here and it'll start melting the plastic. And I was like, it's called heat. I was like, it's entropy. Everything devolves down to heat. And I was like, that's why anything that uses electricity gets warm. I was like, 99% of the energy you put into that bulb is just, it's running as a heater. I was like, now this is going to increase our heating bill. He looked at me like, Dad, we're running thousands of watts of light bulbs. That's like 2 space heaters. I was like, well, now our fuel system's going to have to compensate for that difference. I was like, but the fuel's a lot cheaper than the bulbs. And he looked at it. I was like, but that bulb's 50 cents. This one's $7.25. I was like, I don't care how much the bulb costs. I wouldn't care if this bulb was $20. And he looked at me like, you're nuts. I was like, what I care about is how much comes out of my bank account. And he looked back down at the calculator and said, $18 a month. I was like, if that bulb only lasts 2 months and it consumes like $2 a month in electricity, it's saving us $16 a month. I don't know what it was. I think it was more than $2, but I'd have to figure it out again. But I don't feel like doing that. It's less than 1/10, so $18 would be $1.80. He goes, yeah, about a little over $2. Yeah, it's almost 10 to 1. It's better than 10 to 1 actually. So it's a little over $2. I was like, $2, $18 every single month. So after 2 months, it saved us $32. I was like, that's 4.5 times the value of the bulb. I was like, and that bulb is going to last 5 to 7 years. I actually tested them. I used to take a Sharpie and write the date on the bulbs, and I would try one of each brand and see which ones lasted the longest. And basically, I found a correlation between the warranty and the bulb life. Bulbs that said the bulbs lasted 2 years, yeah, it's about what they lasted, 2 years. That's why they warranted them for 2 years. The Sylvania and GE bulbs that had 5 and 7 year warranties, oh, wow, somehow these bulbs managed to last 5 to 7 years. Isn't that amazing? So he finally finished chewing on this, and he figured this out in his head. He opened the drawer. He handed me every large bill in the drawer, $200, and said, buy as many bulbs as you can. He's like, every time you come in, take some more, replace all the bulbs. Because I had made him teach himself. He came to the conclusion himself instead of me telling him what the answer is, which doesn't usually work. I had to educate him so that he could draw that conclusion himself. Because when he comes to that conclusion himself, it's more difficult to let it go. Sometimes people do let it go. There was an interesting video. This guy who was in the Navy was talking about, I don't remember the exact points, but basically he was against transgender and gender affirming care. And the person in the audience was telling him how, this works. This is a real thing. This is tested. There's science, there's biology, etc., etc., etc. And he just dismissed it. And what's amazing is that he describes his story in the Navy. And she basically rests her case. She's like, she is not exactly what she said, but she something to the effect her remark was, well, you made my point for me. And he didn't get it. But you could see him starting to get it. You could see the realization entering his mind. And he realized that she was right, and he would not accept it. It was cognitive dissonance, and his own bias was preventing him from accepting the truth that he was realizing. What this man didn't realize is that he had gynecomastia. I think that's how you say it. It's when men grow breasts. Not just fat, but they actually grow breasts. Fat and breasts are two different things. If you lose weight, you lose that fat. But if you grow breasts, no amount of losing weight gets rid of it. Breast tissue is permanent. You can't lose it by exercise. The only way to get rid of it is surgery. And the Navy paid for his surgery to get rid of the breasts. And it worked. It fixed his life. It fixed his mental, psychological problems that he was having because he was a man with boobs. And he was coming to the realization that she came to the realization already. And some of the crowd, you could tell, came to the same realization. And of course, all the comments in the video were talking about how he owned her, he owned her, he owned her. No, he self-pwned. He owned himself. Because right there on stage, even though he rejected it in the end, I'll give him credit. He was live with an open mic. And he did a pretty decent job of handling this dissonance that was occurring in his mind there live on stage, even though he ended up rejecting the reality that was in front of him. he came to the realization that he was transgender. What is transgender? Transgender is when your psychological sex is different from your biological sex, or some aspect of it. He was psychologically male, but his body said otherwise. He had breasts, which we associate with female, and this was causing him sex dysphoria or gender dysphoria. It was making him uncomfortable. He got sex-affirming care or gender-affirming care through the Navy, removal of the breasts, which brought his physiology back in line with his psychology, removing the dysphoria, fixing his problem. You could see him realizing this on the stage. Sadly, religion is one of the few things that can cause people to straight up reject reality in favor of their doctrine. Now notice there's a difference. I'm using the words faith and religion differently here. Faith is what you believe in. Religion is what the church tells you to believe in. Faith is, well, it's faith. It's your connection to God or whatever deity you believe in. The church is a system of control that's used to manipulate, brainwash, and control you. Faith can adapt to reality. Religion cannot. Because religion needs a fixed, static, rigid control doctrine to control its constituents. If they adjusted that doctrine to match the new reality that we see now, because we know more now, well, that would cause their constituents to then question other parts of the control doctrine. And pretty soon your system of control breaks down. That's why churches resist anything regarding sexuality, sex, or gender, or whatever. That's why they resist it so much, because it brings into question a fundamental precept in their control doctrine. And they know that eventually their system of control will break down unless they reject it and maintain their fixed, rigid control system. That's why there's so much crap about sex, sexuality, gender, etc. in our society today. Because, 46% of the world is Christian. And yes, Islam is just a fork of Christianity. It's like 30% Christian and 16% Islam. So that's like 46% of the world is based loosely on Christianity or whatever Christianity came from. And so it's very hard to overcome that. Very difficult to overcome that. But, I thought that was an interesting story. I had that discussion with somebody tonight, which reminded me of the story with my dad with the light bulbs. It's basically the same thing without the religion. I mean, if I told my dad this $7.25 light bulb would save him money over these 50-cent light bulbs, his just internal automatic bias was to say, you're nuts. There's no way a $7 bulb is cheaper than a 50-cent bulb. Because there's no line item on your electric bill that says, this is how much the bulb cost you. You have to figure that out. Once he did that for himself, within 2 weeks, we had all the bulbs changed. Dropped our electric bill $400 a month. Just changing the light bulbs dropped our electric bill $400 a month. He looked at me and said, why the hell didn't you tell me this sooner? And I looked at him and said, asshole. He got so mad and then said, all right, I deserve that. You were right. You've been trying to tell me for the last year and a half to change the bulbs. And I got no resistance when we started switching to LED bulbs. Now the drop from LED wasn't as much as the drop from compact fluorescent. It was like a 30% drop, but also a longer lifespan. I was very selective of what bulbs I would use. I used 2 to 4 watt bulbs, and a lot of them. This way we didn't have the burnout problems you have with the high wattage LED bulbs. But yeah, that was interesting. It was interesting, because you have to understand how the mind works. And part of the problem is evil people know how the mind works too. They groom our children on purpose, and we accept it because we agree with it by being the same religion. The problem is most people who believe in the religion treat it as a faith and don't realize that it's being used against them, that their own faith is being used against them as a system of control. The motivations of the people who control your church isn't to bring you closer to God, it's to control you. And they're using your God to do that. And it's very hard to teach people that difference because they don't want to hear it. They want to reject it out of head. That makes things hard. And sadly, that makes things hard for people who shouldn't have a hard life. I mean, these are people who need help, not your attack and assaults and ridicule. And human beings are very, very mean to each other. If you like horror films, well, that's pussycat stuff compared to reality. Human beings can be particularly nasty to each other, and we do things to each other that would just make you puke. You just vomit. It's so, or you'll just reject it out of hand and say, no way, there's no way, no way. I can't remember if the word's, I think it's called piking. And I'm pretty sure it was the European or Middle Eastern. I can't remember. I'll have to look it up again. But they had this technique of taking a sharp stick, basically a spear, and they would shove the spear up your ass. And these people got good enough at understanding human physiology to miss all the organs and major arteries as they shoved this stick up your ass until your head pushed up, it came up your throat and out your mouth. That's right. A stick went in your ass and came out your throat. And you'd basically become a shish kebab, literally. Why'd they go through so much effort? Because they wanted you to suffer. If they popped an organ or a major blood vessel, you'd just die. Before they even finish, probably. You just bleed out and die. Or sepsis would set in pretty quickly. But if they can miss everything, you might stay alive for days, maybe even a week before you passed. I don't remember how long. Again, I'll have to look it up. I'm remembering all this stuff from memory, so I could be off a little bit. But yeah, we come up with some pretty vicious, nasty, disgusting ways of killing each other. And usually in the name of some God. I miss my dad. It's really weird. I know this is strange, but I really wish I could have just laid in bed or laid on the couch next to him and just have him put his arm around me and hold me. That's not something we've ever done. At least if we did, I don't remember it as a child. Obviously, you don't do that with a teenager. That's a regular thing, but I miss that. I want to hug him one more time. But you can't. The universe is an asshole. Fuck you, universe. What are you going to do? We'll eventually fix it. We'll figure out how to cure aging. It's a disease. We'll eventually figure out how to fix it.